I'm really pleased to welcome all of you today to this week's program for the event for the Asia Policy Program. My name is Sheena Chestnut-Greitens. I'm the faculty director of the Asia Policy Program. I do want to thank both the Clements and the Strauss Center, our parent centers, for their support of the Asia Policy Program, as well as the Carnegie Corporation of New York, which provides funding for our speaker series, including today's event. Today, we're going to be talking about the role of the U.S. Economic and Security Review Commission with this subtitle, Still Crazy After All These Years, which I will ask our chair and co-chair to explain. I will let them talk a little bit about their background in some of our introductory conversation. So I will save the full formal bios. Those appear on our website for those of you who'd like to read them. But Mike Kuiken is a distinguished fellow at the Hoover Institution and co-chair of the commission, and Randy Schriver is chairman of the board for what is now titled the Institute for Indo-Pacific Security, formerly Project 2049, a major think tank that works on Asian security and economic policy issues in the Indo-Pacific. We're really pleased to have them joining us today to talk about the role of the Commission in China policymaking. I will note that I've had at least one student from the LBJ School go on to work at the Commission and to contribute to its efforts in forming China policy. And so we'll get into the important role that the Commission plays in the formation of American foreign policy toward China, as well as the issues and the specific challenges that it covers. It really does a comprehensive look at the economic and security issues that appear in the US-China relationship and how those shape American foreign policy. So I'm really pleased to have them joining us today. We are delighted to host them at UT. I wish we had better Texas weather for both of you, but please join me in welcoming them today. So thanks for being here. Appreciate you taking the time, and wanted to start out by just asking you about this event title, Still Crazy After 25 Years. And so I wanted to ask you if you could just tell us a little bit about the role of the Commission, its history, and maybe also, how each of you, with your careers in public service and in policymaking, got involved in the Commission's work, and why you think it's important and have the roles that you do with the Commission today. So maybe, Randy, I'll turn it over to you first.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Greitens, and thank you for the three organizations that are helping host this. Really appreciate the opportunity. I think I chose the title, but Mike is usually the...
We did trade texts on it.
We traded texts, and he's the one who usually comes up with the creative sounding titles. But we were founded 25 years ago. I'm going to steal some of his lines too, because he talks about the formation of the Commission. It was when Congress granted permanent normal trade relations with China, which then paved the way for WTO entry for China. And in the process of doing that, they lost the annual MFN, Most Favored Nation Trading Status debate. And annual MFN debate was where everybody aired their concerns about China, whether that be human rights, trade practices, security issues, whatever. And so, channeling Mike, as he would say, when the Commission was created, it's because Congress didn't trust two entities, China and the US administration. And so we were really created to keep an eye on all things related to China. And the interesting thing is, when it was started, the real China hawks back in the day were human rights, religious freedom, and labor. The security hawks, that was sort of a little bit of a later development as the PLA grew and started behaving more assertively, et cetera. But it was really human rights and labor. And the original China Commission was filled with people that were quite hawkish. And so if you looked at where the Commission was versus general population versus the Congress, it was extremely hawkish, and therefore some people would say even a little bit crazy. And I would say the Commission hasn't budged an inch, but over time we've sort of become center of gravity in a way. And somebody not long ago said, you guys used to be really crazy. You're not really crazy anymore. And I took umbrage to that. I said, hey, come on, we're a little bit crazy. We're just crazy in a different way. And I think the way we're different is we really focus on the at the horizon or over the horizon issues. We try to do the deep dives on things that are maybe relatively obscure, but we see as emerging as quite important, quantum, biotech, and the like. And so we're really trying to pave the way for Congress to gain literacy, understanding, and think about potential actions to help address the competition with China in these various areas. I spent a career working in the Indo-Pacific, a lot of it China-focused. And so when I left my last executive branch job as Assistant Secretary of Defense, I was appointed by Senator McConnell to a 2-year term. We represent congressional leadership in both chambers, so 12 commissioners, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. Right now, Senator Thune gets 3 picks, Senator Schumer gets 3 picks, Speaker Johnson gets 3 picks, Jeffries gets 3 picks. So I was a McConnell appointee and appointed for my 3rd term by Senator Thune, and Mike can tell you about his background. But for me, it's an excellent way to really have that broader conversation about the nature of China and the challenges it presents, and have a platform to give Congress some input on potential responses, actions, legislation, and so on.
That's great. I have some questions about some of the cutting-edge issues that you mentioned the Commission's covered, but I'll come to that later. Mike, maybe if I could ask you about how you got involved and what you see as the role of the Commission in American policy toward China.
Got started. Thanks for having us, first of all. Thanks to our wonderful hosts. It was very smooth of you, Randy. I forgot to do that. Started on the Senate in July 2001. I started on a job called a staff assistant answering phones. Thankfully, I only did that for 6 weeks and got promoted to a guy named Carl Levin's legislative staff 6 weeks later. Spent 2.5 years there, moved over to the Senate Armed Services Committee, which, if anyone's familiar with, is basically the only committee in the Senate that still legislates on a regular basis other than the Appropriations Committee. Spent 12.5 years there until Senator Levin retired. Senator Reid, who's now the Democratic ranking member on the committee, kept me on. It was very nice of him. And then in 2016, I got a call from the Schumer operation, and then they asked me if I'd consider applying for the job, and I said absolutely. It was one of the dream jobs in the Senate, so I moved over to become his then Democratic leader, Schumer's national security advisor on January 3rd, 2017. So his first day on the job was my first day on the job, and it was a fantastic opportunity. The national security advisor slots for the 4 leaders are incredible jobs. You're a gang of 8 staffer, so you get all sort of the exquisite intelligence, and you also have this ability to sort of commandeer all of the committee staff to sort of come up with big ideas and do some really cool things. One of the things I was part of was the Chips and Science Act, which originally started as the Endless Frontier Act, which, if folks are familiar with the Endless Frontier, it was an idea that came up at the end of the Truman administration when a guy named Vannevar Bush basically said, we got to figure out what to do with all these people that have been part of the American war machine during World War II. He created the National Science Foundation. Most of the science and technology funding that folks think about these days is really part of that endless frontier and the investments we made after World War II. During my time in the Schumer operation, you're always trying to find places to get information and ideas. And Randy touched on some of this, but one of the places you could always reach into reliably for ideas that were, to Randy's point, sort of over the horizon or on the horizon was the China Commission. And there were 1, great staff, 2, a lot of good commissioners. And then Randy didn't touch on this, but one of the things that the commission does, and it's sort of the secret sauce of the commission, is that it's a consensus document. And that means it's bipartisan, and all 12 commissioners are agreeing on the outcome. That doesn't mean it's a lowest common denominator product. There's obviously robust debate with among the commissioners on a lot of the recommendations, but that is the secret sauce of the commission. It's bipartisan, it's consensus. So you can have a senator talk about the work of the China Commission in a statement, on a floor speech or something like that, and you can say this idea has the bipartisan sort of stamp of approval of 12 commissioners that are actually appointed by the 4 leaders. So it's a really sort of cool way to sort of take ideas from these folks that work their butts off. A lot of the staff are Chinese language speakers. They've actually gone to the source materials. So the level of fidelity and confidence you can have in the information is a lot different than some of the other things you can get in Washington. And that's sort of the origin story of my sort of contact with the commission. And when I was finally deciding to get out of government, I asked Leader Schumer if he'd appoint me to this commission in one of his slots, and he was very gracious and appointed me. That's my story. What did I miss?
I'm going to remember this secret sauce comment when you threatened consensus at the end of our annual report process this year.
I would never do that. I want to write a dissent at some point. I mean, it's like very Scalia-esque, right?
I was going to say, that sounds very Supreme Court-esque.
Yeah.
12 commissioners.
Yeah.
So let me ask about an issue that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds that you all have looked at intensively, that's maybe not quite an emerging issue, but an enduring one. And it's also one where Congress has played a role in sort of backstopping or making sure that the administration didn't overreach in its outreach toward China, and that's Taiwan. And so Randy, I know you've written about this. You've talked about the origins of the Taiwan Relations Act, that it emerged out of congressional concern over the normalization of relations with the People's Republic of China in the 1970s. So there's this longstanding congressional interest, maybe independent of or in conjunction with the administration and the executive branch, in making sure we get Taiwan policy right as a country and as an international community. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Commission's work on Taiwan during the time that you two have been involved, and both kind of how you see the Commission shaping conversation about Taiwan, but also where you think that's going in the next year. We're not that far from 2027, which is a year that's the 100th anniversary of the PLA, and a potential milestone that Xi Jinping has given the PLA to be ready for a Taiwan contingency. So, how have you seen Taiwan policy change when you've been at the Commission, and where do you see it going?
Well, if you look at our annual report, there's basically two bins. One bin is the chapters we do every year, and another bin is filled with things that we decide in a given year we want to take a close look at. We always do a Taiwan chapter every year. I think it was part of the original legislative mandate. So it is something that the Commission has consistently looked at year after year after year. I think around the time I joined the Commission was around the time of then Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, and we saw military activity ramp up significantly to what is now sort of a new normal. If you look at military activity around Taiwan, for example, flights across the center line, that used to be a very rare thing. When I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, if a PLA plane went across the center line, that was a phone call in the middle of the night to wake you up and tell you that something very provocative has happened. Now we're getting about 60 a week of flights, and we're getting surface, naval, Coast Guard, maritime militia activity all around Taiwan, including persistent presence on the eastern part of Taiwan. So it's quite significant, the military pressure and coercion. Admiral Paparo has said this is no longer exercising, this is rehearsal. So I think the biggest change is this intense military intimidation and pressure. So as we've continued to look at this, we've tried to develop recommendations that are fit for purpose and what we're seeing. And so this last year we talked about the part of the Taiwan Relations Act that is sort of less talked about usually. People talk about arms sales. We're required by law to provide Taiwan with weapons of a defensive character for sufficient self-defense. People talk a lot about arms sales to Taiwan.
You sound like you've said that a few times.
I've said it a few times, yeah. There's another part that said...
It's always very interesting when we do this to see if he's saying something new.
Yeah, and you'll call me out on it if I am. But there's a second part that is we must maintain the capacity to resist force if asked to do so by national command authority. So we have to be able to defend Taiwan. Separate and apart from a political decision, would we, if Taiwan was attacked, commit forces? But we have to have the ability to do it. We think even before Ukraine, even before Iran, that was being tested. Now we have this significant munitions depletion due to the Iran conflict. So one of our recommendations was Congress should ask the DoD enterprise, Indo-PACOM, prove it. Show your homework. Prove that you can defend Taiwan if asked to do so. That has been picked up by a couple of members in a legislative proposal. We'll see how that goes, but it's part of the conversation now as people are more aware, oh, we have this law that says we've got to be able to defend Taiwan, and that means an op plan, but that also means all the hard power, the platforms, the munitions, et cetera, et cetera. So we're taking a look at that. We're taking a look at posture issues in the region. We had another recommendation that said Indo-PACOM should be supported with posture initiatives in places like the Philippines and the Southwest Island chain, and maybe Taiwan could contribute to that. After all, it's for deterrence and potentially their defense, so why shouldn't they contribute to some of the infrastructure requirements there? So it's a dynamic environment, and we're trying to, again, keep pace with that and not just do the inbox stuff, but beyond the inbox stuff and think about how Congress can play its role. As you rightfully point out, from the time of the TRA, they wrote themselves into this policy process, and it's, I imagine we'll be doing the same thing next year. It's 2027, August 1st is a be ready by date, not necessarily a go date. Right. So our job is to advise the Congress to maybe be directive where necessary with the administration and with Indo-PACOM to do the things that they need to do to uphold deterrence. Did I change my?
You did. You did some new material there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's good. Let me leave you with a couple of things. I forgot to ask Siri how many days it is until 2027, but it's not many anymore. And so as Randy talks about the be ready by date, folks need to sort of think about just how close 2027 is. Again, whether it's a be ready by date or a go date, either way, it's very soon. I recently read this book. It was by a guy named Russ Shorto. It's called The Island at the Center of the World. It's a book about the colonization of Manhattan Island. New York obviously became the island at the center of the world. As we sort of look forward to 2027 and we think about just all the things that are happening with respect to Taiwan right now, think about Taiwan for a moment as the island at the center of the world. And the reason I say that is, look at the camera that's staring at Randy and I right now. Look at the timer that's on the back wall. All of those have legacy chips in them, okay? Most of those come from Taiwan. As you think about your iPhone, it doesn't have the highest end chips in it, but it has among the highest end chips. Where do those come from? Taiwan. Now, think about your conversation with Claude this morning, ChatGPT, or whatever your preferred large language model is, if you're allowed to use them here at UT Austin, I'm not sure. That was powered by chips that come from Taiwan. Now think about Taiwan no longer being a provider of chips to the United States and the democratic world. Where are we going to get our AI chips? Where are we going to get our iPhone chips? And where are we going to get our chips to power the lights, the camera, and all those other things? That is really the kind of thing that we're talking about when Randy talks about all of the sort of changes in the status quo in Taiwan. And these are real problems that the democratic world will have to confront in the event that President Xi decides to move on Taiwan. The second thing I want to put in your mind is Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon. These are two things that are still happening to the American infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure, and more right now. There's a concept for this in military parlance. It's called operational preparation of the environment. President Xi has made incredibly clear, General Secretary Xi, Randy will always correct me, is doing operational preparation of the environment. The intent of operations like that is to make sure that you can hold the environment that you tend to conduct a military operation in in a state of paralysis. And that's essentially what those are designed to do. And they are living right now on our telecommunications infrastructure. And so just think about that as we get closer to 2027, as we think about chips, and we think about sort of what operational preparation of the environment looks like, and it is happening to us right now.
So one of the things that the Commission's report does is to cover some of these enduring issues and these new issues. And I would just commend the Commission's report to anybody who's interested. We assign pieces of it in my China class every year here.
We can send hard copies.
I have a hard copy, but if you'd like to send more, we'll take them.
You know two people.
Great, I'll hold you to that later. But one of the things that's really useful is to have this really comprehensive resource on the state of play on some of these key issues, both enduring and emerging in the U.S.-China relationship. So just a resource for any students or anybody listening. Would really commend the Commission's work, because this bipartisan consensus report is hundreds of pages of information that's been exhaustively researched and is
20 fewer pages than last year, though.
Okay. Congratulations.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you about one of the hearings that both of you were involved in, and that was the hearing on Made in China 2025, because I think it speaks to some of the issues that you just mentioned. And maybe using that as kind of an example of, like, how do you pick the issues that the Commission chooses to hold hearings on and chooses to feature if they're not the regular staples of the report, and why Made in China 2025? What did you learn? What came out of that particular hearing?
Honorable Vice.
No, beloved Chair.
No.
So how do we come up with hearings? It's actually when you leave one of the congressional leaders' offices, you're like in a constant knife fight with the the opposition, essentially. So whether you're in the House, Jeffries and Johnson staffs are sort of arguing over things all the time, and the Schumer-McConnell operations are obviously fighting over things all the time. So when I got to the commission, I had sort of assumed that we were all going to get our knives out and start fighting each other. And the first time we started talking about hearings for the following year, I mean, it was like puppies and unicorns. It was amazing.
I don't think people have used that phrase to describe DC in a while.
I mean, it was totally bizarre. It was jarring to me. Yet it was sort of refreshing at the same time, where it was somebody like, oh, I'd like to talk about Made in China 2025. And somebody's like, I'll do that with you. We were going to hold hands and walk out or something. It was absolutely incredible. Anyway, so Randy graciously agreed to do this Made in China 2025 hearing. And the thing that I always try to do when you come up with hearings is in Washington, we're always focused on the alligator closest to the boat. So in Congress, everyone's talking about the thing happening today. And Randy touched on this sort of over the horizon issue. So Made in China 2025 is not sort of a new thing, right? It's something that Chinese have worked on for a long time, over a decade. And it just happened to be that we were in 2025. So I said, Randy, let's do a hearing on Made in China 2025. If you look at the actual program that the Chinese came up with, it's incredible. And one of the things that we focused on a lot was the biotech space. And the reason we did that is because the Chinese have made incredible strides in biotech. And if you look at the original Made in China 2025 plan, I got to come up with an acronym for that so I don't have to keep saying it. They said we're gonna kick butt at pharmaceuticals, was basically the bottom line of what it said. And they made incredible investments, and they succeeded largely. The ambitions of Made in China 2025 are incredible. The byproduct or consequence of the focus on pharmaceuticals, though, is that they created an infrastructure layer that allows them to advance not just in pharmaceuticals, but across the biotech space. If folks are familiar with biotech and the opportunity that it presents, think about chemicals that can be replaced with biologicals. Think about things that you can grow that replace materials. Think about bioindustrials. Think about, and this is really far out there's a University of Washington professor that's working on this, growing semiconductors. But it's sort of been proven that there are ways to do these things. So China now has this incredible infrastructure layer in biotech because of Made in China 2025, and they are just starting to grow on it and advance that space. And it was one of the areas of focus. We had one of my colleagues at Hoover actually testify, and he sharpened all of our minds in terms of the urgency of this particular space. We also did quantum. What else did we do, Randy?
Well, space, but that sort of also was a different hearing. I think in terms of what we learned, I'll speak for myself. We have very different systems and different historical approaches to innovation, whereas China historically, theft of IP and fast follower, fast adapter, but cutting edge innovation, maybe not on par with the United States. I think what we learned through this hearing and the research is they've leapfrogged in a lot of ways by being very intentional and by prioritizing. And if there's something that their system does well, it's they can identify national priorities and commit resources and energy to it. And so in certain areas, they said this is a national priority. We're going to corral state-affiliated enterprises around it. We're going to do sort of the whole stack, if you will, to use a phrase from technology. We're going to put money at primary education. So we're working on this today, but we're also going to be a leader on this well into the future. And if you look at the chart, they didn't get all their goals, but even falling short in some areas, they made very, very significant progress and really positions themselves to be competitive going forward. Our system is different, and there's a role for the U.S. government, but typically much of the innovation is in the private sector. It's a result of venture capital combined with research, combined with entrepreneurs, and that's certainly served us well, and certainly you don't want to jettison that, but I think we had some recommendations that the U.S. government does need to step up and really be a more important, influential player when it comes to this innovation cycle on our side of the ledger. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest in that, given the tech sector in Austin and in Texas more generally. So, I wanted to maybe do a DC thing here, so apologies in advance if that's what I'm doing. But I wanted to ask you about a couple of alligators that are close to the boat, because I think there's probably a lot of interest in them, and that is the conflict with Iran that's going on today and the second-order effects on U.S.-China competition and on American foreign policy toward China. Because there's been a lot of discussion in the news about how much of this, what the effects on China, good, bad, or otherwise, will be. And then, that war is now playing out in the sort of run-up to President Trump's visit to China, which got postponed when the conflict first started, and is now scheduled to happen shortly. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you see those two things, the current regional, global conflict, and how that plays into U.S.-China dynamics today, particularly with the president's visit. If you were going to give him advice, what would you two have advised senior national policymakers on how to form and execute China policy? What would you say at this moment about what's going on and how to navigate it?
Go ahead, Randy. I mean, he's the Republican, so I'd probably get kicked out of the Oval Office.
Well, even prior to the conflict, a year ago, we did a hearing on the Middle East, China activity in the Middle East.
Axis of autocracy.
Well, that was last year. But we did a whole Middle East thing the year before. Anyway, and it positioned us to really do the deep dive on the China-Iran relationship, which is interesting. I mean, China was buying about 90% of Iranian oil. Clearly sanctionable, but they were also going to lengths with carve-out companies, with ship-to-ship transfers, all kinds of things to avoid the outward appearance of sanctionable activities. But 90%, that's pretty significant. Now, for China, Iran's oil represents about 12 to 14% of their oil. So not as important to China as China is to Iran, but not insignificant. I think the most honest answer is too soon to tell, but I think if you kind of disaggregate and look at this in pieces, I think there's a shock and awe effect. I mean, China sees time and again that the U.S. military is pretty damn good at certain things, and whether it's Venezuela, a snatch operation that the Venezuelans really didn't have any defense against, including some of the Chinese systems that they had acquired didn't seem to do much to help prevent that operation. And now the military operation in Iran being very devastating and very effective and very lethal. So I think there's a bit of a shock and awe effect, but the countervailing effect also might be, well, they're seeing the U.S. committed elsewhere. They're seeing the U.S. pull certain platforms out of the Indo-Pacific to help with the effort in the Middle East. They're seeing munitions depletion. So I think they're sort of calculating all this and trying to understand the net sort of effect on the U.S. capabilities in the Indo-Pacific that they care more directly about. But I think it probably gives them some pause on the military side. On the sort of geopolitical and greater competition side, I do think they're seeing us bogged down without a clear end state that's easily achieved. I mean, we may get something out of negotiations, but Iran gets a vote, and so far this has been dragged out, and it appears there's not a good exit strategy, other than negotiating something that if the president tires of this and wants out well in advance of the midterms, so that whatever happens to oil prices is on the favorable trajectory come November, then we may end up with a worse deal than even the Obama deal that the president pulled out of. I mean, we've got to understand what's going to happen to the highly enriched uranium and what the plan is going forward, because if we don't do that, we're going to be in a worse position, not a better position than before this started. So I think the Chinese are trying to understand all that and calculate that. The interesting wrinkle now, I think, is, and we've documented this in the Commission's work, but more and more coming forward about how much material support China's actually giving Iran. And even the president, he doesn't tweet, he truth socials. So he truth socialed that a ship... Not as pithy. Not as pithy, but he truth socialed that a ship we boarded had a bunch of Chinese equipment bound for Iran, which he described as not a very nice thing to do. I have stronger words for that, with the Chinese providing military means for the Iranians to kill American service members, but I would think that would be a complicating factor regarding their upcoming discussions. Now, the president is very focused on trade and economic issues. The only work that's being done that resembles interagency preparation is in the trade and economic space. He's got a trade truce that goes back to Busan, South Korea, when he met Xi Jinping. They want that framework to be something more permanent and more durable, and from the president's perspective, more favorable to the United States. I'm sure the Chinese will bring up Taiwan. I'm sure they'll bring up other issues they care about. But if the president has his way, this will be about trade and economics, and we'll have a more durable framework, and then all the other stuff can sort of be managed.
I'd have a couple of observations. The first I would say is, no matter how you feel about the JCPOA, once President Trump left it, this sort of outcome of some sort of conflict, armed conflict with Iran, I feel like was a certainty. The other thing I would say is there's this great economist cover, which was, had President Xi or General Secretary Xi and President Trump, and it was like, don't do anything when your enemy is making a mistake. I thought it was a fantastic cover. And then I can't remember who told me this, but it was a fantastic line, which is the one thing China's learning from everything going on in the world right now is what a quagmire looks like. Whether it's Ukraine or whether it's the situation in Iran, as they look towards Taiwan in 2027 and beyond, they know what they don't want it to look like. And so from a planning perspective, I'm sure that the PLA is doing all kinds of work to sort of rethink or just refresh how they look at a potential Taiwan scenario. And Randy is absolutely right. One of the things we've seen in Iran is the fusing of technology and traditional military operations in a way that, has always happened on sort of an iterative basis, but has really accelerated with the ability of the Pentagon to deploy some of the advanced language models that we have right now. And the outcome has seen the pace of operations really accelerate, which is incredible. So the Chinese are absolutely watching that and learning from that. And so that is something that we're going to have to want to sort of remember that they're learning from. And one of the things I did early in my time on the Armed Services Committees, I worked on the what was then called the Joint IED Defeat Organization. These are the improvised explosive devices that were killing all kinds of American service members. And one of the things you saw as you worked this account was, one, just how much the Pentagon was really already back then bringing technology to bear on all kinds of problems, change detection, ways to sort of leverage machine learning to get ahead of the adversary. But the other thing you really sort of sharpens your mind on is this idea of countermeasure cycles in warfare. And so I don't know, we don't know what this is going to look like as we turn back towards the Indo-Pacific, but that countermeasure cycle is going to be very interesting to watch the Chinese sort of measure up their own forces and how they might respond. So that's sort of how I think about this. Just moving forward, I think Randy's assessment is absolutely right as well.
That's really interesting, if fairly sobering. But thank you. Maybe before we open it up, I have kind of one final question, which is, we really appreciate the two of you being here. I don't know that I recall the chair and the co-chair doing the kind of public outreach that the two of you have done. I know you made a trip to California and shared some of the commission's findings and did some outreach there, and you're here in Texas. Can you talk a little bit about, how you think about engaging the public in American-China policy and how that shapes the way you approach the chair and the co-chair position?
He just keeps pestering me to travel and do these things, and I
call my work wife sometimes.
It's interesting. The commission clearly has a mandate to inform Congress, recommend things to Congress. They're our client. But more and more, I think we understand that the challenge is a broader one, and that there are very fundamental, foundational things that are missing, which is literacy on some of these really important key issues. And our role in getting out and doing things across the country, I think, is still in support of Congress. Who elects Congress? The people. So having a conversation that's more accessible, that's broader and more diverse geographically, our hope is not just to elevate the work of the commission, although we're very proud of the work the commission does, very proud of the product, and happy to have as many people know about it as possible, but it's really still ultimately in service of the Congress to have potentially a better informed public. And some of these issues are biotech, quantum, semiconductors, very technical, very niche kind of issues, but they're critical. Yeah. And so if we can help raise the literacy just a little bit and have a public that's better informed when they vote, when they communicate with their members, when they bring questions and concerns to their members, then it's mission accomplished. I also think people might have a particular view of Washington right now, and if that view is informed by certain television stations and certain media outlets, you might think Republicans and Democrats can barely stand to be in the same room with one another, let alone work with one another. And as Mike said earlier, one of the things that I'm most proud of, and I think I can speak for fellow commissioners, is the bipartisan nature of our work. And so getting out and showing that, we can have a polite conversation. And I don't know, have we disagreed yet? I mean, there's plenty of stuff we
not publicly here today.
Earlier over breakfast. Yeah. I think if we can just play a small role in modeling that, that's a benefit too.
Anything to add?
We're road testing this. We've talked about this back and forth, but we've never actually sort of shared views here. So it was good to hear Randy say that. I would add a couple of things. One, I agree. I'm sorry, I don't disagree. A couple of things. One, I was in Washington a long time. Randy was too. I mean, the incentive structure of think tanks in Washington to me is like a little skewed. And so I feel like we need to get out of Washington, first of all. One of the coolest things I did when I was with Leader Schumer and on the Armed Services Committee staff was travel the world or travel the country, whether it was universities, businesses, research and development centers, and everything like that. There's a lot of good ideas outside of Washington. I don't know if you know this.
We think there are a few in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, this is my first time or second time at UT Austin, but you're absolutely right. Like, Georgia Tech is one of these places where I always wanted to visit. I still haven't gone. But every time these folks in Georgia Tech would come up and see me and sit down and brief me on something, I was like, wowzas! Like, we got to get down to Georgia Tech. So there's a lot of good ideas outside of Washington, and like one of the things Randy and I sort of agreed on is we got to sort of meet people where they are instead of dragging everyone to come and see us. And so like that's one of the reasons we're doing these sort of events. And then the other thing is that in doing the education work that Randy talked about, the literacy work and the education work on the things that are being talked about in Washington, and sometimes in Washington, being talked about in a way in Washington that's partially informed and not fully informed. And so that's something that I think the commission does a good job of bringing to bear in a way that doesn't have sort of complicated incentive structure that some of the think tanks in Washington have, which I affectionately refer to as the think tank industrial complex. And so getting outside of Washington and doing that work, I think, is really important.
Sounds like I need to tell my wife I'm going to Atlanta next. Is that? Yes. Okay.
Well, U.S.-China policy is often described as one of the few areas where there is a larger amount of bipartisan consensus, and I think some of that probably is due to the foundational work that the Commission has done to debate these issues in an informed and civil way and come up with these detailed bipartisan consensus documents that form a lot of the foundation of policy. So, I mean, appreciate your work on the Commission and toward that end, but also, it's really important to a lot of at UT to be able to disagree and debate policy issues in a reasoned and civil way, and to provide a way of educating the public, not just students, but the citizens of Texas more broadly about some of these critical national security issues. So we appreciate the chance to have both of you here today.
Do you mind if I do one more thing?
Yeah,
Randy touched on one thing that I really think is important, which is modeling. The people that used to have the job that I had when I was in the Senate are like Mark Esper, Dennis McDonough, Steve Biegun, Rich Verma. There's more, but like these are all people that for a long time had to argue over things, and just modeling like good behavior is something that I sometimes doesn't get enough sort of attention in Washington. But like Randy and I do disagree on plenty of things, but we can do that in a way that's sort of respectful and enjoy each other's company at the same time. And so I really just sort of want to echo that one point that Randy made. I think it is a valuable sort of thing to see and honestly to do as well.
Yeah, it's good to have models for that, whether you're kids in kindergarten or adults in Washington D.C. Not making comparisons. All right.
It was very well delivered.
Well, with that, I'll open it up for a few questions from the audience. If y'all could identify yourselves, do you want to call on folks yourself, or do you want me to go ahead?
You're the chairman. It's up to you.
No, Dr.
Okay.
Brighton, so it's you.
Yes, ma'am. Can you wait for the mic? Sorry.
Randy's very hard of hearing.
Hi, I'm Hasta Coleman. I'm a predoctoral fellow here at Clements in the Asia Policy Program, and my dissertation work is on China's engagement on non-traditional security issues, especially in its periphery. So I was really
I know
interested.
somebody who knows a lot about that topic, actually.
Who's on my committee, thankfully. So I had a question about the Commission's recommendations for what I believe turned into the strike force on scam centers. And I was just curious if you could speak more to, how the U.S. has, and how the current administration has responded to your recommendations for addressing scam centers, and also, I think, other non-traditional security concerns that are connected, like smuggling, narcotics, and money laundering, that are affecting American citizens, but also really affecting the governance, creating governance challenges for countries in Southeast Asia and other periphery to China.
Well, I'll start, and Randy's got a lot of views on this stuff too. So we did the focus of the Randy was talking about sort of how we organize the commission report every year. One of the things we do is we try to focus on a region. So last year we did Southeast Asia. This year we're doing India. So in last year's focus, one of a couple of the places that we visited were Cambodia. Where did we go? Vietnam
Philippines.
and Indonesia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think all of us, from all the commissioners that were able to travel, got to Cambodia, and I mean, we'd all heard of scam centers. Some of us had probably encountered. I actually had my identity stolen, so I'd been a victim of this as well. But none of us sort of appreciated the scale of these scam centers in Cambodia, and just how pervasive they were, and the impact on Americans. The conservative estimates when we were there were like $10 billion a year. It's getting hoovered, no pun intended, to the institution I'm affiliated with, out of the bank accounts of parents that are saving for their kids' college education, retirement funds, life savings, all kinds of things. And so that was the first thing we learned. The second thing that we learned, which was just totally staggering and something that we'd never heard in Washington, was the level of sophistication of these scam centers. So imagine, all of a sudden Randy and I are beautiful women talking to somebody that we're trying to sort of scam the money out of their bank account. So they're deploying incredibly sophisticated artificial intelligence tools to make Randy and I into beautiful women, and to make our voices sound and appeal to whoever it is that they're trying to scam. They're using AI tools to craft messages that they are using as sort of the source documents, all of the social media posts and everything they've been able to learn online about certain individuals. So just that kind of tipping and cueing from a targeting perspective was absolutely incredible to learn about. So that's sort of the literacy stuff that we do on a regular basis. One of the recommendations that we had was, my God, like scale and scope is unbelievable. But the other thing is, like, if you're scammed, who do you call? Do you call 911? I mean, I sort of didn't know. The answer is, like, who knows who you call? The FBI does some of this stuff. The Secret Service does some of this stuff. Obviously, local and law enforcement, to the extent they can, will help you, state law enforcement. And so the idea was, we've got to do a better job of sort of having some sort of task force or fusing effort between the federal law enforcement agencies and state and local government. And that was one of the big recommendations that we had. I think the administration, to its credit, is maybe not in response to our recommendation, but just to the awareness that a variety of publications have done on this, and our work set up, I think it's called a strike force at the Department of Justice. So that's that's a great first step. I mean, now I know who I can call at least, right? So that's step one. I think they're continuing to do some implementation work. I know there have been some arrests in this space, but maybe Randy, you want to talk about some of the other pieces of how the Chinese are working in this space.
Yeah, well, I think another thing we learned is that at the early stages of this, China was victimized pretty extensively, and the Chinese government, maybe unlike our own, said, you're going to knock that off, and we're going to insist you knock it off, but we're also going to allow you to continue to target Americans and others. Americans are the target of choice because of our wealth and our open information system, et cetera. So the Chinese are in many ways complicit, and that's shouldn't be acceptable. I think the other thing, it's interesting, you know, like if we did a recommendation, Congress took it up, and the net result was deterrence was a little bit stronger in the Taiwan Strait, and we go to the American people and we say, you're welcome. Deterrence is just that much stronger. People don't feel that. But if we can shine a light on this and get Congress to do something in the administration on this, this is direct. This is direct. I mean, my parents, I mean, we know so many people that have been victimized and likely victimized from one of these scam centers. This is something that we can really make an impact on and is much more tangible and direct than, you know, another day of deterrence in the Taiwan Strait, as much as I care about that.
Yes, right here.
Microphone's coming.
And then we'll go to you next, sir.
Hi, my name is Sydney. I'm a junior mathematics and economics student, and I just sort of take a passing interest in this. But as you already touched on, China operates in a very different way with securing its infrastructure and things because it doesn't work in the same way as the U.S. with the distinction between public and private industry, whereas in the U.S. innovation's predominantly from the private sector. I was wondering if you could touch on a little bit about how the Commission operates with this sort of distinction and deals with the distinction between public and private, creating regulations and things like that that sort of allow us to come up against that sort of system from China.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, I think you can only do too much to counter and thwart, and I mean, I think recognize what they're doing, and what's the Maya Angelou quote? When somebody reveals to you who they are, believe them the first time. I mean, China wrote this plan, China 2025.
Always have good quotes. Yeah, I'll work on that.
This was all there for all to see. And so take them at their word. They pursued this with great vigor, and as we said, were largely successful, not across the board in every benchmark, but, and so, you know, I think to some extent we can thwart that with export controls, with sanctions, with cooperation among partners and allies. But at the end of the day, you can't begrudge them for having a strategy and doing well at it. You got to have your own act together. And I think when you look at where we would put the balance of effort, it's getting our own act together. And I think if you look at our recommendations, it largely would address that. What does the U.S. government need to do to step up its role in the innovation process in the United States? What should the focus areas be, et cetera? So,
I think Randy hit on it. I would say, listen, there's a role for the government and a role for the role for private industry and innovation, and in terms of the military-industrial complex. And you know, the Chinese have just decided to fuse those. I think after World War II, the democratic world was very deliberate in the creation of civilian entities and military entities, and we've worked hard to sort of maintain that. I think the Chinese have basically said to hell with that model, and have decided to sort of leverage the efficiencies of just fusing them, and that's what we're seeing today.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Larry O'Brien, LBJ School alumnus. One could argue that Trump 45 helped the U.S. populace identify China as more of a strategic competitor, if not strategic adversary. Trump 47, as he indicated, is all about tariffs, trade, big deals, and so forth. But we have some vulnerabilities, supply chain specifically, and my question is about rare earth mining and specifically processing. That would have been something that your commission would have identified as over the radar issue in prior years, but somehow that didn't get through the legislative attention or executive branch attention that it should have warranted, because now we find ourselves very much hamstrung and disadvantaged because of the vulnerability we have to China's stranglehold on rare earth mining and, again, particularly processing. Where did we how did we miss the 8 ball? I mean, how did we miss that? And what can we do better from a policy perspective when we're looking at future over the horizon challenges to make sure that they get the attention they warrant and the policy and action that they deserve?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. It's a great question. We have been looking at supply chains and potential remedies for a long time at the Commission. I guess a couple observations about how we let this sort of slip away. Number one, who is responsible for these supply chains? Who sort of owns them? It's not the US government in most cases. It's private enterprise, private companies. And they are incentivized to cost optimize and profit optimize. And we sort of allowed China to become dominant in particular areas like rare earths. Rare earth being a misnomer, not so rare, but because of the pursuit of cost optimization and their willingness to extract and process in ways that would probably be unacceptable in the United States given environmental considerations, they developed this very dominant position. That can be undone, but that takes intentionality and probably resources because, again, you got to pay a premium if you're going to have supply chains that are China-free to develop the mines, to develop the processing, to develop the relationships, et cetera. So that can be done, but it's going to take time and money, and we should have started 10 years ago. I've told this story a number of times. Mike has heard this. The other problem is the exercise of awareness and mapping is actually really, really hard. When I was at the Department of Defense in the first Trump administration as Assistant Secretary, we asked the question of our defense primes, how vulnerable are you? How much risk are you bearing with Chinese input at the rare earth critical mineral level, component level? Give us a sense of that. And we were bracing for a very bad answer, and we were bracing for high number, 40%, and we'd wince and say, okay, let's get to work and take care of this. The answer was much worse than we expected, which was we have no idea. That defense companies that were producing exquisite weapon systems after a second, third tier supplier lost all visibility and had no clue. And so I think the challenge is you're not going to likely decouple completely from China. I'm not even sure that's advisable. A market of 1.4 billion that's buying a lot of soybeans and other US products. But you've got to pick the critical sectors where you don't want to bear risk, where vulnerability is unacceptable. And then you got to do the hard work. You got to do the mapping, and you got to do the hard work of developing alternative sources and cooperation with partners and allies. And I do think this administration is getting after it, and particularly the Department of Defense is doing some innovative things. And even at the presidential level, I don't know how steeped he might be in this, but he'll say the words, when Australia visits, critical minerals, and we've got to work with the Australians and with the Japanese, same thing. So I think we've got top-level support to do this work. DoD is trying its best in using innovative approaches to it, but it's really hard and detailed. I mean, I heard another person at a defense prime say, I've got this exquisite thing that might have 4,000 parts in it. If I have 3,999 of those parts, and one's from China and they're not giving it to us, that thing might not work. So the thorough mapping and the thorough hard ground game of creating new supply chains is tough.
Randy gave me all kinds of goodies in there. Let me just tell you a couple stories. I think the Biden administration started a lot of this supply chain work, and Trump administration, to their credit, have continued it. I would say that one of the pieces of legislation that I worked on was the Chips and Science Act. One of the things we tried to put into it was a sort of a supply chain office at the Department of Commerce, where we were going to create some authorities that would allow the government to compel information out of industry. I was only lit up 2 times by all of Washington's lobbyists, and that was one of them. It was incredible. And it sort of exposes the same issue that Randy was able to sort of pull out of the system with military industrial companies. And so industry doesn't know and doesn't want to know necessarily where things are coming from. And the voice of industry, regardless of which administration is power, does have an outsized voice when they all scream at the same time and very loudly. That was the first thing I'd say. The cost optimization part of it that Randy talked about is a real thing. I mean, CEOs would come through on the Hill all the time, and you could tell that those quarterly calls that they have to do with their investors put them under a lot of pressure. And that's real pressure when it affects their bottom lines. And that does mean that you find the cheapest place to make something. And so oftentimes that's been in China. As we've had our own sort of not in my backyard issues, China has said, well, you can do it in our backyard. And that's sort of made them the manufacturing machine of the world. And so this has all happened right under our nose since the very creation of the commission, which was right around the time we changed the arrangement with the WTO for China. So, I mean, how this started, I think we all now know, and how it ended could have easily been predicted. I'm sure there were some folks in the communities that Randy mentioned at the top that said, this is what's going to happen, and look where we are.
Connor, middle.
Hi, thank you guys for being here. My name is Connor Fiddler. I'm a first-year PhD student here at LBJ. And I have a question about force posture in the region. And I feel like there's often a kind of competing interest between having a forward deployed force posture, troops frontline, maybe revealing capabilities to China. But the problem is that it makes it vulnerable, right? Having troops close makes them vulnerable to Chinese attacks. Revealing capabilities might make it easier for China to counter. How do you guys think about those competing interests between deterrence and vulnerability? And then what frameworks do you give policymakers to think about that?
So I think you've got to kind of fuse together what an optimal posture might look like and then what is diplomatically and politically feasible. And that's kind of where Indo-PACOM and the State Department are right now trying to figure all this out. And they've had good success, I think, in the Philippines with the creation of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation, ECTA sites. They added 5 recently, which are all in proximity. It's northern Luzon, it's Palawan Island, it's in proximity to the Taiwan Strait contingency. We've had good success in the Japanese Southwest Island chain. So if you look at the country that's closest to Taiwan, it's actually Japan, with Yonaguni Island being the closest, and getting access to the Southwest Island chain and being able to exercise and preposition things is also, I think, a step forward. But the grand vision is really more access. The Defense Department uses ABO, access basing and overflight. The grand vision is to have quite a bit of access for dispersal and diversification, because in an A2AD environment, anti-access area denial, which is, by the way, an American phrase describing what the Chinese are doing, the Chinese language phrase is actually closer to counter-intervention. That I think that's more revealing. They want to keep us out of the fight. But in that environment, having diverse targets, which more things to target and hit, but also geopolitically more complex if we're stationed in more countries and they're being targeted, that's a more complex equation for China to work through. All of that is at work and unfolding, but it's slow. I mean, even where we're successful, it's slow. I've been to some of these ECTA sites in the Philippines, and I mean, we're talking an airstrip that the local community is riding scooters down in the middle of the day, and a chain link fence for security, and this is where we're going to have an F-35. We got a little work to do. So I think always playing an away game, always being reliant on forward deployed forces, but also munitions, logistics support, everything potentially in a contested environment. We need to do a ton of work on posture. And that was one of our recommendations, as I said up top, was to maybe create a fund where Taiwan could start to pay into it. Because in the midst of all this, our defense enterprise is arguing constantly about color of money and who has to pay for this. And it's not even that expensive, pouring cement in a lot of cases to repair an airstrip, but they're all arguing over who pays for it. Meanwhile, the Chinese are deploying more drones and ballistic and cruise missiles and so on and so on.
The only thing I'd pile on is think about the forces in Korea, and think about the sort of situation there and there. One of the things that I think Americans don't always think about is that China will undoubtedly ask KJU to start stirring up trouble along that border, and those forces in Korea are undoubtedly going to be drawn into a fight. So the situation in that part of the world, as we think about it, isn't just a Taiwan scenario. It is undoubtedly also a North Korea scenario. And so that's something just to sort of focus minds on some of the dynamics that will undoubtedly play out in the event something happens.
Yes, sir.
65,000.
James Galbraith, and as a former executive director of the Joint Economic Committee, I wanted to say welcome to the frontier here. But I wanted to ask you about the recent visit of the leader of the opposition in Taiwan, Zheng Liwen, to Beijing, which was a very cordial visit, and how you would assess the prospect that down the road, if, for example, she were to become president of Taiwan, that there might be just a peaceful resolution between Taipei and Beijing. And would you be terribly disappointed if that were to occur?
Well, I think our position has been we would accept any outcome that is arrived at peacefully and has the support of the Taiwan people. I mean, I might not like to see Taiwan under the thumb of the CCP, but if they arrive at that in a peaceful fashion and Taiwan wants it and votes for it, you know, I think it's not the role of the United States to prevent that from happening. But I think that's an unlikely scenario, at least as far as my eyes can see. I don't have any issue with the Kuomintang chair going to China. I have an issue with the Chinese not talking to the duly elected government in Taipei. So they're only choosing to engage the opposition. They're not engaged with Lai Ching-te and his government. So clearly they are trying, you know, this is United Front tactics. This is trying to divide the people of Taiwan and prop up one party versus another, which I think is ultimately not going to work, but also be counterproductive in a lot of ways. Every time she says something that is the throwback Chinese nationalist one China vision, Kuomintang's popularity goes down and DPPs go up. So I think she's perhaps out of step, even with her own party in many ways. That's an assessment. You know, I don't know. It's not up to me. It's up to people in Taiwan and up to the Kuomintang. But I think if it's going to be only CCP, KMT dialogue, that's not going to get us to a peaceful resolution. If they're willing at some point to talk to Lai Ching-te and his representatives, then we might have something to work with. That's my view.
I would just pile on Randy's comments. Just as we were walking out of the hotel this morning, one of the things that happened is that President Lai's visit to, I don't know where he was traveling, Africa, was basically pulled down, and the reason it was pulled down was through a variety of coercive activities by the government in Beijing. So I think that tells you sort of everything you need to know about intent, right? I can't remember his Maya Angelou quote, but you know that would sort of play here as well in terms of what their objective is.
All right, with apologies, I'm going to have to call it here because we need to wrap up. But please, you know, again, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. We have a long list of questions we didn't get to, and again, my apologies. But we could ask you a million more questions and probably still have a room full of hands. So if you all will please join me in thanking the co-chair and chair for their visit.